Percy Jackson, a popular YA fantasy series about Greek mythology and parental issues. This series and its sequels have followed me throughout my primary years in school. And college now, I guess. Over the decade of its existence, Percy Jackson has had several iterations, including several spin-off stories, comics, and the movies we don't talk about. And as recently as last year, the Percy Jackson TV series on Disney+. Rick Riordan finally got to put out his vision of the Percy Jackson series on screen. And I think it's aight. I don't know, I'm kind of lukewarm on it right now. Regardless of what I thought about the quality of the show, I knew I would have that thought in the back of my head. What if it was an animated show? Now this is definitely more of me being an animator than the show necessarily being tailored to animation, in my opinion. This video isn't me trying to say the show would be better animated. This is more of a thought experiment and good practice for me as an aspiring animator. So basically the plan is to pick out a clip from the Percy Jackson show and reanimate it. I'm aiming for about 10 to 15 seconds because animation takes very long and I would actually like to get this video out. The very first thing I did was crack open my sketchbook and do face studies of the main three. I like the casting and I want to do my best to capture the characters' likenesses in my style. Admittedly, some of these came out better than others. I did these with thick markers to not get caught up in the smaller details. Grover and Annabeth came pretty easy to me. Capturing Percy's likeness in my style is what stumped me, specifically his nose. You can see this problem carry on as I switch to digital and do side and front face views of the main three. I thought these would be okay for now, but in hindsight, I should have experimented with different expressions and angles more, because after I jumped into a full body reference sheet referencing this photo for the closing colors, I think the costume design for the three is pretty solid, and I didn't want to make any major changes. I did decide to take away the graphic on Percy's shirt to save time. Another concern was Percy's flannel. I made a pattern and hoped I could implement it when coloring so I wouldn't have to color every single frame. With the references down, I had to stop procrastinating and actually watch the show to decide what scene I wanted to animate. Admittedly, this is the part of the video I procrastinated on the most. I find it hard to just sit down and watch something sometimes. I don't know, I'm gonna pull out my no attention span Gen Z card for this one. I had a couple things I wanted for the scene going in. I'd like to at least try to find a scene with all three protagonists in it. I also wanted to use the exact audio from the show so I could have a side-by-side comparison. The problem with trying to match the show is that a lot of the scenes are drawn out and it doesn't translate well into animation. A second of animation can take hours, so I have to be very precious. Like initially, I wanted to do the ending scene in episode 7 where the three meet each other on the beach and face Ares, but it goes on for way too long for me to animate. I'm sorry. There was also the Medusa battle, but honestly, I don't think it would play out that well in animation form. I would want to make my own storyboard in audio, and then at that point, like, what's the point? I settled on the Forest of Regrets from episode 7 when Annabeth gets stuck and Grover and Percy are trying to free her. All characters get a voice line and share pretty equal amount of screen time. The main concern of this scene is that it is pretty dark and I would like people to actually see my animation. You can see me trying to solve this problem through creating color keys for each shot. I find it good to do a little experimenting with the colors before going into animation. For the color palette, I put a multiply layer on the ref sheet with a test background underneath and adjusted the color as needed. I'm trying to make sure there's enough contrast between the background and the characters so that the audience can easily read it. With all the prep work done, it is now time to actually open up Toon Boom and start animating. For the first draft, I focused on getting the positioning of the characters and composition. I didn't see any major changes that I would make, so I followed the show's composition pretty closely. After an additional rough sketch, I go straight to keyframing or drawing the main frames. Animation studios will typically have an animation and then cleanup stage. I just go from line art to in-between if the animation isn't too complex because it cuts the time in half. Onto in-betweening, it's mostly just grunt work and connecting the dots. A tip I do have is when animating the face, you can copy the ears and even the head shape. I've always struggled with keeping the ears consistent, and this just saved me a whole lot of time. One thing I love about animation is that I can add extra emphasis to actions and emotions based on the audio. For this animation, I added Percy breathing heavily and him attempting to break the vine in this shot, which isn't as visible in the show. Also in this work in progress, you can see I didn't fully animate the last two shots because I simply got impatient and wanted to move on to the coloring. This is a consistent habit of mine of skipping steps then coming back to it, which makes it a little frustrating when you want to format your video by stages of animation. Oh my god, this is such a long line, what the hell. Gotta breathe. Onto coloring, I just copied the color palette from the shaded refs. I tried to color Percy's clothing with the flannel pattern, and yeah, it didn't quite work, so I had to resort to leaving it green and green screening it in the composition phase. Green screening on static flannel can look a little jarring, so I was planning on keyframing it and moving it in After Effects. The backgrounds were pretty easy. They literally consist of lines and gradients that are blurred. I made 4 backgrounds and flipped and zoomed in for the rest of the shots. Now it is time to import everything into After Effects for the compositing. I added overlay and multiply gradients for lighting and shading. I then used the inner shadow layer mode for the rim lighting. Pretty standard stuff for compositing so far. I also wanted to add ambience, so I spent way too long trying to figure out how to do particles. With all that out of the way, I couldn't procrastinate on working on Percy's flannel any longer. I actually didn't know how I was going to replace the green screen with flannel, because the flannel would still show up in the background. So I ended up clipping the green screen Percy and flannel to a duplicated layer, and it worked better than I thought it would. The frustrating part was keyframing the flannel to move with Percy. It was extremely tedious for all 3 shots. I understand why 2D hand-drawn shows just settle for leaving a static flannel pattern. Listen, learn from me to not create characters for animation with heavy patterns. Not like I have any of those. And with the big stuff done, it is now time for the finishing touches. I twinned Grover's head moving out of the frame and added blur around the edges of the screen for depth. I'm sure it has a name, but I don't know. And voila, it's done. And here's the finished animation.
I already tried. It's too strong.
How did this happen?
It's some kind of regret, right? But what would you have to regret?
Like everything I create, I have a few gripes with it. The main thing is, I don't like how I drew Percy. I don't think I captured the actor's likeness as much as I could have. Grover and Annabeth look fine, but it's probably because they don't move their head around as much as Percy does. I was not satisfied with his face throughout the whole project. It's definitely something I'll have to work to improve on later down the line. I'll make sure I'm satisfied with how a character looks before I animate them. Another issue is the clip I chose doesn't have a lot of varied shots, mostly consisting of close-up and medium shots, so I wasn't able to get as much variety as I would have liked. I would love to animate more clips, but it's a lot of work. This animation alone took 2 weeks, and I'd like to actually get this video out in a decent amount of time for you guys. But just because I can't animate a few scenes doesn't mean I can't draw a few shots. Screenshot redraw. Okay, no, I cannot script. So for the rest of this video, I'm gonna draw a few screenshots from the show to just give it some variety, and because we are only 7 minutes into this video. God, 3 weeks of work for 7 minutes. I like really need to loosen up my scripts. The first screenshot redraw I wanted to do was in that aforementioned scene where they wake up on a beach and are about to face Ares at the end of episode 7. It's a medium shot of the 3 looking out into the distance. Overall, pretty simple. Also, I forgot to talk about this in the animation section. The show is in the typical movie ratio being 2.39 by 1, so I've been translating it to YouTube standard being 16 by 9. So I have to experiment a little with the composition. I don't turn my brain off completely when I get to this stage. I've turned to applying the rule of thirds grid to the screenshot I'm referencing and my canvas to see where the focal points are. Honestly, a good tool when trying to figure out composition. Onto actually drawing the piece, rendering the clouds was pretty easy, and I had fun with the colors. The expressions of the 3 characters remind me of that meme with the 3-headed dragon. I think it summarizes the trio's personality pretty well. I wanted the screenshot to look like it had been taken from an animated show, so I kept rendering to a minimum and restricted myself to gradients and rim lighting. And here's the finished screenshot. I think I was able to imitate my animation style pretty well. It looks like a screenshot from something I would animate, so mission accomplished. The next redraw is going to be this screenshot of Percy facing off against the Chimera in episode 4. Let me tell you, I struggled with this one a lot. I was designing the Chimera on the fly, and trying to make a CGI monster into something that could be reasonably animated is a challenge. I won't lie, the line art looks like an elementary schooler traced a animal coloring book, and the color scheme looks like baby's first demon cat OC, but I digress. I also overlaid a scale texture to imitate animated shows I've seen that will overlay textures, especially on big monsters. I cannot express how much it pains me to not be able to render or shade the Chimera. It just doesn't It would definitely need a few passes before I am satisfied, but it's serviceable for a screenshot. Moving on to Percy, the angle Percy is at is kind of awkward to draw in 2D, which is a sign I need to practice face angles more. When overlaying the flannel, it looked really flat. In my personal opinion, flannel does not work in hand-drawn animation. Other than that, I actually got to draw his sword Riptide. It was fun giving it highlights and textures. I think I was able to bring it to life with the little rendering I gave myself. The background was pretty roughly done. I was trying not to get up in the details and spend 10 hours on the piece. It works for what is needed. And here's the finished screenshot redraw. When looking at the piece, I'm legit like, okay, where do I press play to actually see the animation, so. And with that, we have reached the end of the video. I hope you got something out of it. Sorry if this video isn't as grand as you expected. Animated shows quite literally have millions of dollars thrown into them, and I am a broke college student making videos in their bedroom. Animating from shows, live action, or animation has been pretty fun, and I would be interested in doing more of it, which is a good transition to talk about why I made a Percy Jackson video specifically. I'm going to be completely honest, this video was partially a test to see if people would be interested in me reanimating a scene from Heroes of Olympus. That is like my childhood series, and it would be really fun, I think. I would like to hire actors and figure out how the hell to do sound design and music, so doing something like this with an already existing show seemed like a good step first. I would love to animate my son Leo, but yeah, it would take a lot of effort, so I need to know if people are actually interested. So leave a comment and subscribe if you would want that. Also, if I schedule this video right, it should land on the first anniversary of Percy Jackson and the Olympians being released on December 20th, 2023. So happy birthday, Percy Jackson! I honestly don't know how I was able to land on the first anniversary. I'm just that cool and based. You know, that's about all I have. Goodbye for now. Koi out.